All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started, and we'll get Ailene in here as soon as we can. Hopefully we get her video up and running. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Adam Ketchmarch. I'm the Executive Director of the National Drowning Prevention Alliance. I'd like to start off today by explaining how attendees can participate in today's webinar. At the bottom of your screen, you see a question and answer function and also a chat function. If you have a question at any time that you'd like the panel to address, go ahead and type that either into the question and answer function or the chat function. I'll be monitoring those during today's webinar, and we'll get to as many questions as we possibly can. I'd also like to thank D&D Technologies for sponsoring today's webinar. And as just a reminder, registration is open for the 2020 National Water Safety Conference. We'll be holding that in Fort Worth, Texas, April 5th to April 9th. You can go to watersafetyconference.org for more information. With that, we will go ahead and get started today. I see Ailene. We still can't see you on video. I'm not quite sure what's going on there, but we'll
Sorry,
try to.
I am here.
That's okay. We'll go ahead and proceed, and then Ailene, you can still participate. We'll just we'll listen to you instead of seeing you, so Cindy and I can be the stars today. I'm so thrilled to have Ms. Cindy Friedman and Ms. Ailene Tesser joining us. NDPA formed a partnership with Swim Angelfish just over a year ago, and I believe you ladies were privileged to be, I think, on my second webinar that we hosted with NDPA, and we're so glad to have you back today to discuss this important topic of autism and drowning. So I'm going to start out with Cindy. If you could just introduce yourself to our audience, give them a little bit of your background, and feel free to share anything about Swim Angelfish you'd like.
Well, thank you for having us. And I am actually, by background, a recreational therapist and an occupational therapist. And I have the pleasure of having a business partner of a physical therapist, Ailene Tesser. And together we're just recently celebrating 20 years together with a business that does special needs adaptive swim for all diverse abilities of swimmers. And we literally marinate by day. We have 20 locations, and our passion is to help people that are in the aquatic industry understand that we have to address this topic of exactly what you're bringing up and having us be guests to speak about today. And particularly that is this population that's ever growing in the United States of autism. So Ailene and I are very passionate about it. We have created a lot of free resources because we really feel that globally training is necessary. So free content for people to get some education is one of our global missions, and we provide that. So we're hoping a lot of your listeners will take advantage of that.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Cindy. Ailene, could you tell us a little bit about your background?
So as Cindy was saying, I have a physical therapy background, and I've been in the water and a swimmer my whole life. I've taught swim lessons and lifeguarded since I'm a teenager. And about 20 years ago, I've exclusively just worked with children with special needs in the water, and have learned so much and have seen so much and have really embraced the need for drowning prevention in the autistic population.
Excellent. We're thrilled to have both of you with us. And I do have to start out by saying, for anyone listening to this webinar today or in the future, please check out Swim Angelfish. Just the amount of resources available and the knowledge that these ladies are willing to share is just absolutely incredible and pushes our mission of drowning prevention and water safety so far forward. Today's webinar is going to be a discussion around this topic, and I'd like to start off today with, we've known for a long time that children and adults with autism have a higher risk of drowning. I was wondering if we could start off, and Cindy, I'll start with you, maybe explaining a little bit about what autism actually is and why individuals with autism are at maybe an increased risk of drowning.
Well, I think I'll let Ailene actually talk about the diagnosis of autism, but as we were preparing for this panel discussion, we really talked about the wandering, and you talked about layers of protection. These families go through so many great lengths to have layers of protection, even in their home, different kind of locks, security systems. If you sit on any boards, a lot of times the people are asking for high fences to get donated so that they can have safe space that their kids can't escape from. And wandering, I would say, is just such a problem. No matter what the layers of protection that the parents put in place, there are times that wandering happens. So one of the things is the wandering. And when it happens, a lot of times we'll hear on the news that this person end up found in a river, a creek, a stream, or in some kind of body of water, and it was, not a successful attempt to locate and save them. And the other thing is, some of these children and adults are just attracted to the glittering light that's on top of the water, or the way that it's moving, or have been in water and love splashing it. And so when they see it, they're so attracted to it. If I give a quick example, there was a man when I used to work in the New York area, and I asked him, I said, "Are you aware that drowning is among the leading cause of death?" And he said, "Absolutely. I was in Manhattan and I reached in my pocket and my son wiggled his hand away, and there he was behind me in the fountain with all of his clothes on, laying there just enjoying the water on his body." And he said the attraction is so powerful that it just outweighs any safety sometimes that you have put in place. And then I think one of the third things would be, sometimes experience, they don't have any experience in, near, around water. And maybe that's because they loved it so much that the parent couldn't control things and they got nervous. Maybe it's that they were so afraid of the water that they stay away from rivers, ponds, lakes, pools. And so these three things, wandering, attraction, and then just lack of experience, I think are some of the things that are why this statistic is what it is.
I'm just going to jump in with the diagnosis of autism. So for those of you that aren't familiar with it, autism or autism spectrum disorder is a broad range of conditions that are characterized by challenges with social skills, repetitive behaviors, speech and nonverbal communication, and a lot of sensory integration challenges. And for those of you not familiar with what a sensory integration challenge is, it's the way they interpret information around them through their senses, whether it's sight, sound, touch, but also how they can coordinate and control their body. And Cindy really spoke about a lot of good points, but one thing I also want to say is that this group of children that we're working with are very impulsive. So not only is it the attraction of the water, but it's this impulsivity, fight, flight, jumping into something that also makes them very, very unsafe around water.
I would just piggyback on that when I was preparing for this, I was really thinking about how uniquely diverse the diagnosis is, because it requires you to be so open-minded of the range of the ability. So sometimes when somebody thinks of somebody with autism, the picture in their mind of what this person might present like is that they're not talking, they're not looking at you, maybe they're waving their hands and looking at them, maybe they're jumping up and down. But the range of what you see, you could be having at the grocery store, somebody bagging your groceries, they could be on the autism spectrum and you may not even know that they are. So understanding that when we hear the word autism, it is so uniquely diverse, and it really requires such an individual approach for each person, because you're not going to know until you talk with the parents or the caregivers or the companions and meet the person how you're going to actually work with them to get them safe and independent around the water. Would you agree with that, Ailene?
Absolutely.
I know we're going to dive into layers of protection, in a more broad sense a little bit later today. But we know that learning to swim is a key layer of protection for these children. And, as a instructor who, I'm a certified teacher of adapted aquatics, and I've dealt with, nowhere near to where you ladies and your experience has been, but, what I often find is people underestimate what these children are capable of, and maybe think that learning to swim isn't possible. And I want to take a little bit of time and talk about, how do you find that right program, that right instructor, the teaching approach? Finding all these can be, in my mind, difficult at best. What's your recommendation to parents as they search out that layer of protection in learning to swim?
Well, finding the right program and the instructor and a teaching approach that works for this particular child is, first of all, something. Imagine being in the parent's shoes, whether they're doing horseback riding or soccer or karate or whatever it might be. Always finding an instructor that can connect with their child is such a tricky thing. So using them as an example of helping you to understand how you're going to teach swimming is just absolutely huge. Because when you talk about an instructor being maybe a little nervous to push through discomfort, there's sometimes a parent will say to you, listen, my child will always, with anything new, have some screaming for the first 3 to 4 visits. And it's what they do in school, it's what they do in soccer, it's what they do everywhere. So being comfortable and understanding that, okay, we don't want distress, right? But for this swimmer, the parent is educating me that we are going to have some discomfort and that is probably going to dissolve a little bit after the 3 or 4 lessons, just because of the transition to that pool, to that instructor, because so much of it is new. So that I think that's one thing that you're kind of a little bit speaking of, is what is their ability and how do you work through that a little bit? So I think a parent, a companion is a really important key person to talk with when you are figuring out your swim plan. And I think what Ailene and I, we have the Swim Whisper methodology, and we love when instructors complement their existing aquatic swim instruction with becoming a swim whisperer. But what we hear from people a lot is, oh, well, we have a special ed teacher that teaches aquatics, or we have a behaviorist that teaches aquatics, or we're so lucky because Johnny has a brother with autism and he's so good with all of the kids and he teaches us so much. So I think the picking of instructors, when you get somebody that has some kind of either personal or professional experience working with this type of swimmer is what we hear a lot. And that's a great first step.
Yeah, I just wanted to add in that, there's such a wide spectrum of autism that there isn't a cookie cutter approach to say, well, if you do these 4 things, you can work with a child with autism. So really opening up your mind and your confidence as an instructor to ask questions. How does your child learn best? How do you motivate them? How can I help them with learning something? Some parents might say, oh, my child's a very strong visual learner, use pictures. Another might say, you know what, my child just needs to know that there's a reward at the end of this session and he'll push through it. Another might say, I'm going to practice a couple things with him at home and prepare him. Why don't you tell me what your plan is or your routine is every week so I can prepare them? That would help with their anxiety. So asking questions, because not all of these kids are alike.
I want to throw out a question here, and there's such a wide variety of learn to swim options on the market. From one-on-one lessons with particular goals at different ages, to group settings. In your experience, and I think I know the answer to this already, but I'm going to throw it out anyway. In your experience, what do you recommend for these children? One-on-one lessons, group lessons. If you were advising a parent on maybe where to start with their child, what would you recommend?
Yeah. First and foremost, if a parent is going to a swim program, I would ask them if their instructors are experienced just in teaching swimming. Some swim programs don't always follow a swim curriculum. So it's very important that the instructors that they do have are seasoned and experienced. That would be number one. Number two would be asking if they have any specific training in working with kids with special needs. A lot of places advertise that they do lessons for kids with special needs without any specific training. And training is required, because if you're not understanding the child that you're with, then you're just not giving them the best of you. And it's really unfair, because you wouldn't take your child that didn't have special needs to a program where no one was trained. Why is that okay to do with a child with special needs? So I'd ask if there was training. I'd ask, what is the training? And I'd ask if there's flexibility in your child being able to start with a private lessons. Some swim schools don't do privates at all, and they put kids into groups. And for these kids in particular, to be able to discover what they can do and really develop that confidence and that bond with them, private lessons usually are the best place to start. Not necessarily to stay, but to start. What would you say to that, Cindy?
I think when it's possible, having a private lesson offers, especially if that instructor is the one that teaches the group class, it offers the opportunity for them to understand the nuances of that particular child. So if you took a very high level person who happens to have autism and they give you some eye contact and they have some language, being able to do one 30-minute private before you put them into a group would just help you understand the words that you use that resonate with them, the different kind of sensory needs that they might exhibit, how they might get along in a class, and give you the tools that you're going to need so that when they come into your group class, if they're a good swimmer, that you know, maybe it's that you use humor, maybe it's you use language of first this, then that, maybe it's, you know, oh, I'm going to get, they copy me, so I'm going to give them a peer in my class. So just having that opportunity to understand in just at least one private lesson. And Adam, for the purposes of you know, the adaptive swim training that you have, or children with challenges, or I think the swim professor has a DVD, or Monica Lepore's training, there is so much training, and there's so much discussion of inclusion or privates, and it really depends on the swim school or the park and rec if they even have the opportunity or the time to give a private lesson, a private, move it to a semi-private, move it to a small group, and then put them in a class. I think Ailene and I, in our business, we feel like doing a private and then a semi-private and a small group and then a class prepares you to transition in the most comfortable way. But that doesn't seem to be reality in a lot of places that teach swimming. So figuring out a way as a swim school owner or as a YMCA where you could just at least offer it one time so that you could have a little bit better success. I think the necessary training comes in to the point that if you taught swimming to typical people, it is not fair to the parent, it's not fair to the instructor, it certainly isn't fair to the child to not minimally have a 30-minute or 1 hour, some kind of information of how you could use at least some strategies and techniques so that when you meet the child, you have at least 15 things in your back pocket of, okay, I might need to use one of these things to complement my swim curriculum. And that required training, Ailene and I have free on our Swim Angelfish YouTube channel. We don't take your phone number, we don't take your email. So anybody can get 14 swim tips, strategies, and techniques on YouTube at any time. Take the 25 minutes, put those in your back pocket, and be able to have some experience by just a little bit of that free information, because you could really turn a lesson into something so positive and teach with less discomfort.
Well, I think a key word here is flexibility. And, you know, and I know parents who have children with autism are, they have to be flexible in life. But, you know, from a swim instructor perspective, having that flexibility and understanding, you know, and I always say in my experience, it's always best to, let our experiences kind of guide our map moving forward. You know, once we try things with the child and develop a plan, you know, I'm going to share a situation that I encountered probably about 9 years ago when I was running a Learn to Swim program, and we were running multiple group lessons. I had 2 instructors, 10 kids in the water, and we had this new child add, and you could just, it was taking my co-instructor all of her attention on one child. And at the end of the lessons, I had parents saying they weren't going to sign up again. They, you know, were taking their children out of lessons. This was, you know, not working for anyone. And when I decided I really needed to have a conversation with the mother of the child and figure out, you know, what was going wrong. And she instantly started crying. She knew exactly what was coming. And, you know, it was in a small rural community, and she could not afford group lessons. And she knew drowning was such a risk for her child that she wanted to get him into swim lessons. And, you know, all it took was some flexibility on our end to work with her and, you know, figure out where her child needed to end up. But, you know, it's challenging on both sides. And I, you know, my next question kind of goes as to, you know, and I'm sure we could spend 3 hours on this one question, but, you know, what's your advice to instructors and program leaders when it comes to working with children with autism? You know, whether it's integrating them in the program or working them in the water, working with their parents, what would be your biggest piece of advice to share with them?
I think I will just say 2 things, and I know Ailene will probably say more, but it's funny that you said flexibility, because I'm looking at my paper exactly to that, and I wrote, usually an instructor will have to be flexible yet firm. So that therein lies this parent that's petrified and wants their kid to learn to swim. They know it's probably not going to work, but they're signing up because they're probably desperate. And being flexible yet firm, if I share a small little story, this past Saturday, I have somebody who's been going somewhere else, and they spent a considerable amount of money on private lessons, and they wouldn't get the child in the water. And so they had gone to 9 lessons and didn't get in. And the person at the facility said, well, he probably just isn't ready to learn yet. And here's a mom with a 6-year-old boy. They have a cabin on the water. The grandma has a pool, and she's obviously petrified. And so we made a plan, and we put him right in the water. And it was firm, and it was uncomfortable a little bit. But after 10 minutes, he was actually independently propelling a little bit. And I know you said before, like, it's, some instructors are almost nervous because they don't know, well, can they float? Can they do a supine recovery? Well, they don't want to get in, and they're having these behaviors. And the parent had asked them to bring him in, but they weren't comfortable. So being flexible yet firm, because as a swim instructor, if you don't typically push typical kids past discomfort, then you're certainly going to be very, very nervous to do that for a swimmer that has some disabilities. So flexible yet firm. And the other thing that I know Ailene and I talk about all the time is there's no set recipe. There just is no set recipe. And I know we're going to talk about a couple of things that help us with drowning prevention. And one of them is, if you can successfully submerge, you probably are going to be a more successful save. So we really need to get these kids with autism to have opportunity for successful submerging. And I had a boy the other day, used every of the 10 techniques we do. None of it was working. And we'll talk about that later. But then I looked at the mom and I just said, you're nervous, I'm nervous. Successful saves will happen if you can submerge. Are you comfortable doing this, this, and this? Yes, we are. And we went ahead and we picked him up, and he went underwater, and he came up, and he was completely fine. But when I imposed it on him of lips, nose, eyes in, face in, he screamed, his hands were up, he wouldn't go under at all. I said, were you comfortable if I just lift him up and let him go under? So I just did, and lo and behold, he came up and he was fine. But that's like it's a big risk of discomfort, and there's no recipe of it. We were all shocked that it worked. But our overall goal is being exposed to submerging, so that in the unlikely event that he would blink his eyes and open and look and take a piece of equipment, it's just so imperative. But Ailene, I'll let you go with this question.
Yeah, I'm just like busting because I there's something that I want to say. I I get it when it's scary to get a child that is so afraid to get in the water and they start having behaviors and you're a new instructor and you just don't know what to do. Some of it is like maybe you don't even trust yourself that you'd be able to handle them. And what I want to say is a lot of it is your intention. And if you're putting out fear and I don't know what to do, that's what's happening in the situation. But if you put out the intention of, I am here, you are safe, and we're going to do this. We are going to do this. It happens. Sometimes I feel like my intention and my belief that you can do it is 50% of them being able to do it. So that's one thing. Second thing is when you get the permission from the parent to move forward, that always empowers me a little bit more. If the parent is fearful and saying, please don't push them, maybe we shouldn't get in today, it's a lot harder for the instructor to then take charge and say, no, we're doing this. So if the parent is on board saying he does this, but I know he'll love it, push him in, take him in, then follow the parent's lead in that case. And my third thing is let the power of the water help you. Sometimes just getting someone in, even if it's a full assist of just a quick bear hug, 1, 2, 3, we walk in, that compression of the water over 360 degrees of their body, of their skin, releases dopamine, washes away adrenaline, and all of a sudden magic happens. So trusting yourself, trusting in the water, and having the intention of they can do this and I'm here to help them really works.
And I want to throw something in here and just, get your experience on this. One thing, so I teach undergraduate students a lot of the times who are preparing to be health and physical educators to work with students with disabilities in the water. And, I take them through a number of different practicum experiences. We have a number of kids come onto campus and, the one thing that I constantly remind my students is it's not playtime. There are actionable skills that we could be teaching these children in the water. And I don't know if it's maybe a fear or a misunderstanding with new instructors on maybe what these children's true capabilities are. I usually say to them, yes, they have autism, but that doesn't mean they're not a child, and that doesn't mean they can't learn how to swim or how to survive in the water. So I'm interested in, when you work with new instructors, do you see that a lot and really pushing, the point that, these kids are capable of learning and, maybe it's just figuring out the pathway to get them to obtain the skills?
Adam, that's such a good point because we have kids with autism on our swim team doing flip turns and butterfly. So it's not that every child with autism is just getting sensory play in the water, but some of these kids are really learning technique and stroke and have the potential to be really great swimmers. So I'm really glad you brought that up.
And I think when you talk about like the actionable skills versus playtime, I had the pleasure of going to Bridgewater State, and they do a swim and gym for kids with autism. And I was able to speak to these 40 students and instructors. And that was one of the big things also that the professors said, is they wanted the time to be less playtime and more actionable skills. And I think one of the things is talking about instructors. We all listening, everybody listening to this, you have your own style. Are you a nurturing, calm instructor? Are you an instructor that's firm yet kind and moving forward? Sometimes it's working out of your own comfort to help the swimmer achieve an actionable skill of a prone recovery or a supine recovery or a rollover or something like that. And it may be that they're not teaching it in the typical way. So if they take the play of splashing or the play on a noodle, and then they know that I'm not just going to play, I'm going to turn this into a rollover, and then I'm going to have humor and be silly, but I'm not usually a humor and silly person, but I think this child will respond to that. You can turn it into a life-saving activity, right? The skill of a rollover, so you can propel on your back to breathe a little bit, and then maybe that changes into, stand up, jump 5 times, and we're going to do it again. So sort of taking whatever the play that they're enjoying and reminding to take it into an actionable skill, looking at how the person responds. Do they need rhythm and timing? Do they need sing-song? Sometimes kids look like they're anxious and they don't want movement, and then you start being silly and give movement and you see their face light up, and it gives you some clues as to, oh wait, they actually do like moving up and down. So I'm going to try to jump up, maybe go on my back a little and do a supine recovery. So I always think with our instructors, Ailene, and you can chime in, but sort of reminding them, if you do an aquatic in-service, if you are doing adaptive swim, talking to them about it's okay to work within your comfort zone, but there's going to have to be this box of yourself that you might have to step out of a little bit and either be more energetic or be more calm and base, or add some humor, even if you're not typically an instructor that might do that. Does that resonate with you, Ailene?
Yeah, I also wanted to say, make the play purposeful. You don't play the entire swim lesson for the sense of playing. You play to get the child to engage with you, to interact with you, and to get motivated by you. And then you turn it into a purposeful lesson with swim skills and safety skills.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, we had a participant or a participant in today's webinar submit in a comment, and I'd like to read it because I think it gives a really good point and something that I experience quite a bit with working with young instructors. The comment is, I think a huge strength of instructors working with special needs individuals is the ability to discern the difference between discomfort and distress. Versus this is uncomfortable for the child versus this is causing the child distress and trauma. And, you know, in my years, and I know Ailene and Cindy, you've met Dr. Andrea Taliaferro, who I've worked with closely over the years. And one thing that her and I, in working together, have noticed training instructors is they always fall for, if the kid doesn't want to do it, that they're distressed and they don't want to upset the child. And, you know, I've had to get in and physically, you know, lift children off the wall and say, no, we're going to go do this. And I think sometimes my students look at me saying, oh my gosh, he's bullying a child with autism in the water. But, you know, but that's not, you know, really what I'm doing. It's really, you know, if the child doesn't want to do it, they're still a child. They're going to come up with ways not to do it. But in a loving and caring way, being able to, you know, put a firm hand down and say, no, this is what we're doing right now. And, you know, getting the parents buy-in. But I think it's such an important point that, you know, sometimes these kids are really good at disguising distress for not wanting to do something. So
Adam, that's such a good point, because the kids don't have the language and the verbal, right? So if you were working with a child that said no, would you just not do it then? Or would you still push them? And I remember Andrea telling me the story you're talking about in particular, and how by the end you would just have to walk towards that child and they would jump off the wall and start working because they knew you meant business and they knew there were expectations. I think it's great.
I may be known as the enforcer in the autism community in Northern West Virginia, so we'll just leave it at that.
I would love to piggyback on that about the discomfort versus distress, because Ailene and I have monthly ongoing training videos, and we have 2 or 3 of them called Discomfort versus Distress. And when the person, thank you for that comment, when you're thinking about that, also when we pick instructors to work with the kids, sometimes we have to look at the instructor and look at what is their discomfort and what is their distress. Because I know Ailene and I, with our 40 instructors, there are sometimes as certain instructors where we'll have to sit down with them and say, when you look distressed or you look uncomfortable when it comes to the swim skill benchmark of safely submerging, or when it comes to the roadblock of I can't take my feet off the bottom, it provides so much discomfort to the instructor. So distress and discomfort is a wide range, right? And certain parents will view discomfort of their child, but yet the instructor might view that as distress, right? And so the range of discomfort versus distress, understanding what the parent sees for this particular child in that range. And then you as an instructor, you probably give a nice bear hug. You probably do some rhythmical squeezing without even knowing it. The child feels your energy of, oh, you're going to do it.
And it isn't really distress, it's a little bit of discomfort. And a lot of our kids will work through that and then have a smile on their face. So whoever gave that comment, it's constantly an important topic, not only for the child learning to swim, but also for the instructor of how they're feeling.
Thank you, Caroline, for submitting that in. So I'm sure you get this question all the time, is what's the best age to start a child with autism in the water? Because there's such a push right now. You know, AAP has revised their statement on when a child should start the learn to swim process, and or at least being introduced to the water. And I'm interested to know, you know, when do you recommend a child with autism start in the water?
I would love to answer this, Cindy, if you don't mind, because I think that we all know in the swim world, Lana Whitehead and her wonderful books and pamphlets that she gives to pediatricians about all the benefits of babies getting in the water and learning to swim. Well, now take a child that has sensory issues, okay? And all of the wonderful things the water is doing for them. I would start these kids as early as I would start any young child, because you have all the benefits just for normal development that a baby would have, plus the extra input to help them regulate their sensory system, which is one of the biggest battles when children with autism are small, understanding how to regulate their sensory system. So as soon as you would start any other child, start a Mom and Me class, start something when they're really young, under a year old.
Ailene, would you talk just for a minute about the class that you've been doing for the past 20 years? Because I think a lot of people being able to replicate that kind of class would be so powerful.
So I work at a community JCC, Jewish Community Center, and all children in early intervention 3 and under, so between a year and 3 years old, come to this Mom and Me class free of charge. There is somebody that funds it, and we have sometimes up to 13 moms and their kids. And the whole point of the class is just to get the parents connecting with their child, comfortable handling their child around water, doing sensory activities to help their child feel regulated, and get them enjoying water so that they can move from there into a swim lesson.
Yeah, the other nice thing about that, Adam, and if anybody listening, if you can do something like that, is it's sort of like the story you hear about, you know, you have this baby and all of a sudden there are all these different needs, and it's as if you studied for German and you didn't land in Germany, you landed in France, and you have no idea what you're doing. The connection that I've seen in Ailene's class is 13 parents, all with a different path than they kind of signed up for, are now all of a sudden in this really kind of typical activity where they're all together with their kids, and the parents don't have to feel awkward or funny of whatever scream it is or what somebody might look like or this or that. And it offers a generalized peacefulness to all of these parents to be accepted in a pool that's a community place to be. If they have siblings, it offers them to know how to go to the pool later and have a family activity. So there are so many other things that happen from it. So whether people connect with early intervention in their county, or they connect with maybe some schools that do some of these services, I think there's a great need for some kind of early intervention swim program, play, swim, learn, safe. And it's just so many things happen from it. And it's really, really nice what Ailene does.
Cindy, you have such a good point of it being all kids that aren't developing typically, because then that parent doesn't feel like the outsider in the typical class, and everyone is kind of supporting and learning from each other.
That's wonderful, and I'm sure there's a great social aspect and support network that comes out of that for the parents as well. That's wonderful. Along the Learn to Swim line, and I promise this is my last question on the Learn to Swim side, what expectations do they differ for children with autism once we get them in the water? You know, I'm a firm believer that you know, there's no set path for any of us in life, you know, to learn a new skill. You know, some of us, it may take a couple minutes to learn a new skill. Some it may take, you know, 2 months. But, you know, in your experience, do expectations differ once the child's in the water and what they can accomplish?
I think that I just want to say, when Ailene and I were creating the Swim Whisperers in 2010, we did a lot of research and due diligence, as you might call it, on what people were saying. And the things that we found back then, which is almost 20 years ago, right, was they learn the same as typical kids. Take your time. If you can get them to do anything, you're succeeding. And these blogs were so bothersome to us because, as we know, whether a child has Down syndrome or cerebral palsy or autism or whatever it might be, we don't want the expectation of a swim instructor to think, oh, well, I'll just take my time. If I can get them to do anything, I'm succeeding. We want them to want to teach the swim skill benchmarks. We want them to figure out, and we want instructors to have an expectation of, we're going to get this swimmer as safe and independent as possible. We're going to teach them a rollover or changing directions. We're going to get them to move from a private to a semi-private. And we've had the most unusual cases of somebody going into a group class. I have a very, very big 15-year-old. He's 6'4", and he doesn't speak, but he follows and he's happy. And he swims with 2 8-year-old boys who are just have mild sensory issues. And the other day, Tyler yells out, "You're my best friend." Like, just came out, and the mom goes, did he just say that? Because he uses a communication advice. And he follows and swims with them. So I would never expect that I'm going to put this giant boy in the semi-private with you. And it all happened on accident because of timing. And now it's turned out to be this beautiful little group of swimmers. And we're touching the life of a friendship, of a social. So I think the expectation with kids with autism in the water has to be that we want to push them as much as we can, weaving in and out of our typical curriculum of whatever that might be, allowing for the flexibility, allowing maybe for some sensory play or for some deep water, or allowing some equipment that we might not normally allow for a short period of time. But then we always want to go back to remind ourselves, what is the swim goal? What is the swim skill benchmark? And what do I need to do different to be able to achieve that swim skill benchmark?
Cindy, you just hit upon a very key statement in the last thing you said. Instead of the instructor looking at the child being like, this is it, they can't do it, I guess they just can't do it. It's, what can I do differently to achieve that goal? Because the bottom line is, we believe every child, no matter what their ability, has the ability to be independent in the water, even if it's with a little help, even if it's with a little equipment. But we believe everyone can be independent in the water. And what can we do differently as instructors to get them there?
Yeah, and we've had a participant submit in, a point, specifically to what we're talking about. Linda said, absolutely, I have a little swimmer now, 11. He's 120 plus pounds, joined our program after 6 years at another location. In the 6 years, they only taught him how to float and submerge. Now they have to get him moving in the water. And, to the point is, in 6 years, just learning to float, there's so much more that these kids are capable of.
Absolutely.
I just want to bring up, since we're on this of expectation,
Sure.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, please, Cindy.
Oh, I had a boy who's 9 years old who's going to be in our next Special Splash video, and he had gone to swim schools. He had done all kinds of different things, and they just weren't able, not because of anything that they did wrong, but they weren't able to take him to learn a swim skill benchmark because they didn't have the knowledge or the skills to be able to understand how to work with him. And then his mom just decided, okay, we're not going to. So from 6 years old to 9 year old, the family goes and swims and he sits out. And the expectation of helping not only the parents, the instructors, aquatic professionals, that we all need to work together to change the culture, to change the thinking. And we have to accommodate these kids and figure out how to do swimming with them. It's not okay
to just have them go have these experiences. The expectation is, okay, they can only do this. Our expectation collectively needs to kind of change to in a different mindset. Does that make sense, Adam, kind of?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. You know, I didn't have these prepared for today's webinar, but I think to your point, I mean, really, teaching these kids skills, because we're going to talk about layers of protection next. And, I know we're going to talk about the importance of barriers and the importance of, many of the same layers of protection we talk about every day as the NDPA. But learning to swim is so important for these children, because if they end up in the water because of, their attraction to it, they stand a better chance of survival. And, I get this question all the time is, can you share with me statistics on how many children with autism or other disabilities drown? And I have not seen where those statistics are collected. It's really hard to pin down outside of maybe a singular area or maybe one state. But what I did read and put as my dissertation, I'm not going to quote these numbers exactly, but there have been calculated what's called standardized mortality ratios, so SMRs for these children. And an SMR, we each have an SMR for every injury-related incident. And if you have no further risk than your same-aged peer, your SMR is 1. For drowning, children with mild intellectual disabilities and mild autism usually are around a 3 or a 4.
Wow.
And that's just with mild. If there's profound intellectual disability, that SMR could go up to 14, 15. They're 14 or 15 times at a greater risk to drowning. So I can't agree with you more that there are easy things that we can do with these kids in the water, and they are 100% able to learn skills. Go ahead.
The layer of protection, one thing that you can do, especially if any of you listening have a swimmer where the parent is saying, they bolt, they are unsafe around water. The one layer of protection that we can add, and a lot of you know this already, but maybe you can add these other things as a strategy or technique, is to always ask before you get in the pool. But now you know that this person, we have some free videos on our YouTubes from Angelfish YouTube. Now you know that they actually need more than that. So they ask the mom, and then they ask the instructor, whether it's a tapping or acknowledgement. Now, you ask the mom, you ask the instructor, but then you do some kind of routine that allows a little more cushion of time in case you're running after them to grab them. It can be something as simple as ask mom, ask teacher, hands in the air, touch your toes, clap your hands, sit down, kick your feet. You just bought that parent 10 more seconds to run and grab their kid. If it's 1 year later, and that's been their ritual and routine, which is one of our roadblocks, ritual and routine for the past year, I see Caroline or Linda at the pool. I ask mom if I can get in. I ask Caroline if I get in. I put my hands in the air. I touch my toes. I clap my hands. I sit down. I kick my feet, and then I get in. Just adding some kind of ritual and routine that would keep them poolside and not entering. The other thing is you can even add, they ask before they get in the bathtub every day. They ask before they get in the shower. And always in their brain is this ritual and routine of whenever they see any body of water that, oh yeah, I have to ask and I have to do these things, so that it allows time in the unlikely event that somebody is, wandering or slips out of a parent's hand or something like that. Would you agree with that, Ailene?
Yeah, what I also like about just a couple seconds of that Simon Says, hands in the air, touch your toes, it breaks the pattern in the brain of just I'm jumping and bolting into water. It breaks that whole impulsivity cycle that you might not have been able to grab them in time. It just gets them out of that flight mode.
And I don't know, Adam, if this is the next thing, but I know we're getting towards the end. And I just want to say the other really important thing is familiarizing a swimmer with autism, or any swimmer for that matter, with any disability or not, to what a rescue tube is. We have a roadblock that we call I can't touch that. And in our strategies and techniques of I can't touch that, that can be Adam doesn't want me to touch him. or Adam doesn't want to touch the rescue tube. And how are we going to work together to promote successful saves and to decrease this alarming statistic if they're familiar with, oh, that's a red rescue tube. When I see that thing in the water, I'm supposed to take it. I'm supposed to hold it. I never liked to touch it before. Well, now I touch it. Now I can hold it. I've practiced with it. I know what it is. And the strategies and techniques to the rescue tube can be a picture of it. It can be having the parent show them a video of some rescue. It can have the parent, you know, he doesn't want to hold it with me, but we take it home and play with it in the bathtub. It can be using it in your lesson. I can't touch that is a roadblock. So we have to express in multiple ways of what a rescue tube is, what you do with it, if you touch it, how you touch it, hold it, squeeze it, take it. And if they won't do the rescue tube, maybe a kickboard, maybe a barbell, and you work up to it. But it's a powerful lesson, and it might save a life.
So I know we were going to talk a little bit more into layers of protection, but you know, I think we've hit on a number of these as learning to swim barriers around the water. And you know, one barrier that I see more often, and it's one of your, I don't know if this is a free video, but I know it's part of your library, is your tips and tricks for lifeguards and other aquatic staff working with kids around the water. And, you know, I try to always put myself in the other person's shoes. You know, and a parent, you know, that has a child with autism or any disability for that matter, you know, I can tell it's a struggle for them every day, you know, and they love their child and they want to, you know, give the best to their child. And, you know, maybe sometimes taking them to a public place, you know, to learn to swim, be introduced to the water can be challenging. And I know, you know, you have a whole video just on this topic alone.
That video is absolutely free. It's a 25-minute webinar. We redid it because the number one thing was it was too long. I think it was 45 minutes. Now it's like 26 minutes. Ailene actually drove 3 hours to my house and we redid that video because it is just called Soft Signs to Approach Differently. And it can be such a frustrating thing for me, Adam, because I've told some people about it and they say, oh, well, they already have their training. It isn't to replace any training. It's to complement whatever lifeguard training certification you have. And it's just soft signs to approach differently. It's free information. If you run a sensory swim, if you are at a water park, if you have any kind of specialty swim, adaptive swim, this or that, the tips and techniques in there definitely will improve your risk management. It will improve safe saves. And you have to please access that information, put it on your resource page. It's awesome. You don't have to watch it. You can listen to it in the car. Just click on it.
The funny thing is, the day after we did that webinar, Adam, I am working at this same facility, the JCC.
Yeah.
And the little girl, she clearly looks like she has some issues. She's wearing headphones in the water. She's, you know, flapping her hands. She has all of these reinforcers at the side of the pool, gummy bears, picture schedules, everything. She gets out of the water and she starts running a lap around the pool. What does the lifeguard do? He starts blowing the whistle really loud, yelling, no running, no running. And I thought, if they just understood when a child like that climbs out of the pool, it's a great idea to get out of the lifeguard chair and just walk towards them so you're close to them because you don't know if they're going to run, and how to kind of use your body to keep them where they're supposed to be instead of blowing a whistle and yelling. Just all these tips would have been so helpful if you would have watched it.
Yeah. I think we have time to get to this before we have to go. We have Carolyn submitted in something that I think really ties into this, and I'm interested to hear what your suggestions are. Carolyn submitted, what suggestions do you have for parents that are frustrated when their child cannot pass a standard swim test at a YMCA, when their child can swim? They cannot, say, tread water and keep their ears above the water because they keep bobbing up and down. Another example she gave is that the kiddo can't go down the slide because they can't pass the swim test, even though they can swim. I get a lot of frustrated parents for things like this at our local Y. What suggestions would you have to maybe the staff at the YMCA?
I have one suggestion only because there is a water slide where I work. I'm lucky enough at one of my locations. And I have had to ask them if they would allow a sensory swim time. Mostly it was because I had so many clients that come there. But I asked them if once a month they would offer it with an extra lifeguard. And actually that lifeguard watched our webinar. And they offer an hour once a month. And it's sensory slide. So they just put in these extra layers of things and we work together and they allow some flexibility in the rules. I don't know if that's possible, but water slides is just a whole webinar in and of itself. I took one of my clients down the slide the other day and she did like a Spider-Man and then she tried to climb out of it. So water slides, water parks, all of that I think deserves its own webinar anyway. The stimming at the bottom of the water slide and not moving and all those kind of things that we see. But if there's any flexibility for them to get some education from Caroline and to embrace maybe an opportunity of some structured times to allow some flexibility in those rules, it might be one option. Ailene, do you have anything?
No, I think it's just taking an opportunity to educate. It's really important. I used to get like offended and angry, like, how can that be? How can they say that? Look at what they're doing. But that's just the real world and they have to follow their rules and using it as an opportunity for collaboration and education.
Well, I think this will bring us to an end today. Ailene, Cindy, thank you so much for imparting your knowledge, and thank you so much for all you do to support the Learn to Swim community with your resources. SwimAngelfish.org?
.com.
SwimAngelfish.com. Please go look at them. NDPA is going to be sharing more of their resources in 2020, and we're just so thankful for this partnership. And thank you. I know Ailene changed her pool time today to join us, so thank you so much for that.
Adam, I just wanted to mention that any aquatic professional, any facility, on their resource pages or their special needs information, they can add Swim Angelfish YouTube, the playlist of the free webinars for education.
Oh, that's awesome.
Free information.
That's awesome. Thank you, Cindy. And thank you for making that available. This is our last webinar for 2019. Our next webinar, we will be in 2020. It's on January 8th. We'll be joined by Dr. Linda Kwan, who is with the American Academy of Pediatrics, and Elizabeth Bennett, who's with Seattle Children's, and so is Dr. Kwan with Seattle Children's. They're going to talk about some national projects going on and their work in the Pacific Northwest. They have just been doing fantastic work, so very excited for that webinar. We'll also have a webinar on January 22nd, so you can mark your calendars. Those will be on Wednesday, January 8th, Wednesday, January 22nd at 1 o'clock Eastern Time. Again, National Water Safety Conference, registration's open, watersafetyconference.org. You can register today. Early bird rates do end January 31st, so get registered before January 31st. We have over 60 speakers joining us this year. It's going to be the biggest NDPA event we've ever had. With that, again, thank you, ladies. Thank you for joining us at home today, and happy holidays, and we wish you a very safe, healthy, and happy new year.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.